Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell and I am so glad you are here. You do not want to miss today's show. Why? Because we are going to focus on the power of focus. Do you remember this scene from City Slickers with Jack Palance and Billy Crystal?
Do you know what the secret of life is?
No, what?
This.
Your finger?
One thing. Just one thing. You stick to that and everything else don't mean shit.
That's great, but what's the one thing?
That's what you gotta figure out.
If you're building a business, a brand, a consultancy, a content creation shop, or a hamburger stand, what's your one thing? Today's guest has spent decades in the software, high-tech, and startup worlds, and he knows through experience, kind of the Jack Palance to your Billy Crystal, that specialists eat generalists for lunch.
In consulting and marketing and agencies and software startups, you have to find something that you can specialize in, right? What's your specialty? And that takes time. For most people, I say, don't quit your day job. At night, start testing and see if you can get something going. And almost everybody, it's just a human brain problem, starts out wider than they should, right? They think they have the answer, they jump in and they realize, oh, it's not moving as fast. And the answer is always specialize, narrow in on somebody to serve, your target market, or narrow in on the thing that you deliver, your category or your hamburger or your software or whatever it is. So don't quit your day job until you're pretty confident you know where you can double down and focus.
We're so lucky to have Greg Head here with us today in one of our exclusive deck dialogues from our home up here in northern Arizona. And he is here to help you find your one thing, how you focus your brand story using the ABT, and exactly why the longest lines that curve around the block are always for the specialists. Greg is a 30-year software industry veteran who was part of the startup to scale journeys of 3 different software companies in the CRM industry, including one IPO. He is now an active member, advisor, consultant, podcaster, and speaker, helping founders of early-stage software startups all over the world. Greg is also the founder of gregslist.com, the up-to-date list of local software companies and SaaS jobs, which is used by thousands of founders, tech leaders, investors, and job seekers each month. Greg's List is now available for tech communities in Phoenix, Dallas, Austin, and other cities. His consultancy company is Scaping Point, where he works with startup tech founders on marketing strategy, messaging, and scalable marketing execution. So while Greg preaches being a specialist, he also practices it, as is evidenced by his brand new podcast called the Dallas Software Podcast. Pretty niche, wouldn't you say? So while other hosts, including yours truly, have built a podcast for an international audience, and granted, I do specialize in business storytelling, as you well know, Greg has focused his show specifically on the Dallas software market. You'll learn why in just a moment. But first, I am absolutely tickled to welcome Voices to the Business of Story, which is another example of a powerful brand that is swimming in its lane and killing it because they know their one thing, helping you with your creative projects quickly and easily create amazing productions with their online talent. Voices is the world's #1 creative service marketplace with over 2 million registered users. Since 2005, brands like Shopify, Microsoft, GoDaddy, Hulu, Black & Decker, and NBC have used Voices to source the ideal talent for their projects. And one of the beautiful things about Voices is you don't have to waste time, money, resources, energy going anywhere to source the incredible talent that they offer online. You can just do it right from your computer screen. They'll match you with the right talent for voiceover, audio production, music composition, and translation services with professionals in over 160 countries. And they're fast, turning around your project in under 24 hours if you need it. Plus, there's absolutely no risk to you of a production falling flat because Voices uses the exclusive SurePay service, so your funds are only released once the final files have been delivered and you are 100% over the moon over your production. Because the future of work as freelance, Voice is expanding the services offered on its platform to help you meet all of your creative project needs in one single place. So if you're stressed, under the gun, you want your budget to go as far as it possibly can, and you just don't know where to turn, well, visit voices.com and post your job today. If you're a creative lead, writer, director, producer, or other content creator, your one thing for super superb production is Voices at voices.com. Now, please welcome to the show my friend and your startup consultant, Greg Head. Greg, welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Park, and I'm seeing you live, which is an awesome thing in this post-next COVID world, so great to see you.
It is nice, and you are my second live guest here in our special exclusive Deck Dialogue series on the business of story. You were kind enough to come up yesterday. We had a great time last night, had dinner, you spent the night. We just went on a 5-mile hike with our dog Hazel up to Crystal Point, and here we are doing the show on our deck.
Yeah, it's beautiful up here in northern Arizona in the mountains. We're looking out at a beautiful lake scene and a national forest across the lake, and it's been raining all week, so everything's super green, and it's a lot of fun to be up here with you.
Yeah, thanks. And the yellow flowers, the wildflowers are blowing me away. And we've got these black-eyed Susans that stand about 3 to 4 to 5 feet tall, and they are absolutely everywhere because of all the rain we've had this summer.
Yeah, Arizona looks a little different with torrential rains that we've been having here. So I'm visiting from Dallas. I moved to Dallas a couple years ago, so this is Dallas-type rain.
You were in Scottsdale yesterday, and you said you had never, ever seen it rain that hard in Arizona.
Yeah, I was pretty treacherous driving around town. And Arizona can get rain during the monsoon, but there's been a ton of rain this year. Everything's green and wet and humid and complete opposite of last year, but that's how the world goes these days.
Yeah, we moved in up here in 4 feet of snow on February 5th earlier this year. We've been up here full time since then. And Greg, come May and June, it was hot and it was sunny and it was windy and we had wildfires to the west and east of us. And I was really concerned that we might have a problem up here this summer. And then long about June 25th, the rains came. And I think we have had major rains almost every single day since then. And it's a godsend. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, in the Phoenix area, I think they've got a year's worth of rain in the last week.
Yeah. It's been madness. We still have our building down there where Park & Co. was.
Right.
And you've been there several times. You know those shade structures we have up there in the courtyard. Well, apparently a windstorm that came in, an extended windstorm that lasted 5 or 6 hours, blowing up to gusts of 60 miles an hour on Tuesday, tore down about 2/3 of our shades.
Oh,
so it's always something.
Building a house, rebuilding an office building.
Yeah.
No challenges.
Yeah, it's not like starting a startup, is it?
Yeah, right. It's just, that's right. One thing after another.
One thing after another. Well, it's great to have you back. You're on a show here several years ago. But
right.
You and I have known each other in the marketing world for quite some time. I consider you a good friend and a confidant.
Yes.
And, you know, in this 5-mile hike, I should probably write you about a $5,000 check because you gave me a lot other great insights into the business of story. And your thing, what is your one thing? Because you and I do profess it's all about one thing. It's harder to do than you think, but what is your one thing, Greg?
Well, I help crazy tech founders between startup and scale to help create their big companies so they can solve the big problem they're trying to solve in the world and win the big prize. And starting something is a completely different sport than scaling and growing. And in between there's kind of a psychotic phase, a turn that has to happen. And so I mentor a lot with early stage. I consult and advise and invest and speak and have a podcast, and I have my list of all the software companies in Phoenix and Dallas and other cities called Greg's List, which is a resource that connects up resources. So I just know how hard it is to go make a serious company that changes something in the world, which I think is a very honorable thing, and the world needs more of it. But it's still a crazy adventure, and they need help. Founders need help. I did software for 30 years, so now I'm just in the helping business.
Technology marketing, software and tech.
Yes.
So you've been around this a long, long time, and you're on your way into Flagstaff today.
That's right.
And what's happening up there?
Well, there is a 3 or 4 cohorts, groups of startup and SaaS and software founders from Phoenix who get together every month. It's part of the Startup AZ Collective. It's a peer group where they go through the journey together. And it's kind of the founders and the startups that are making the most progress in tech in town and raising Series A VC funding and Series B, and creating bigger companies. There's all kinds of different ways to do a tech startup, and so they're all going to be in one place, and all the people that help them, like I have. So it's Old Home Week for me. I know all the people there, and it's their annual retreat. So it's fun to be with them.
When you see them and you're around them, does it ever change, or is there always sort of a consistent challenge that they are all wrestling with?
Well, the thing that doesn't change is there's always a challenge they're wrestling with. There's always a dragon that's going to slay them or they have to slay. That's the game here. And these are not small dragons, like I have to pass the test this week at school and all that. This is, COVID presented a dozen challenges that would slay normal businesses and the rest. So then the challenges change as you grow. So getting an idea into a product and getting people to pay for it has its own set of challenges. Building a little factory so revenue can grow, and then you have employees and maybe investors. That has a whole set of challenges. Getting to 100 employees and going global and facing competition. And so the growth game, creating companies and products and all of that, is just a continuing climbing Everest game, really. And I think, like the climbing Everest analogy, this isn't like a hike like we just did. It was 5 miles, and it was very pleasant, and most people could do it, I think, and all that. Creating a big company that changes an industry and is worth a lot of money and all that stuff, that's like climbing Everest. Most people don't do it. Most people die along the way. But that challenging piece of the story, the drama, the last mile where you run out of oxygen, everybody dies, and in the movies about that, that's between like 1 and 5 million. I've got something up, but it's not a real business yet. It's not a factory. So that's where I help, and there's not a lot of money in it, but that's where I can add the most value, and that's what I do for fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were at Infusionsoft for, what, 10 years?
It felt like 10 years, but it was 5.
Oh, 5 years.
Yeah, we went from 15 million to 100 million, so there's a lot of dragons in there and everything. So, grew to 500 people and so forth. And with another company in Phoenix, Sales Logics, I was one of the founders there at the startup table. Let's do this in the mid-90s, and a different phase of the software different generation, if you will, and we grew that to 100 million. So I helped grow 2 companies to 100 million in Phoenix, where it wasn't something normal people did at the time, and startups are still more common, but they're not normal. How about that one? Startups are more common than ever, and everybody seems to be doing it, but it's still not a normal adventure. It's very abnormal.
And you got out of Infusionsoft, what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
5 years.
No kidding?
Yes, right.
Jeez, it's unbelievable. And you could really have done anything or absolutely nothing. You don't need to be doing this. Why? Why do you do it? Well,
that's a good question. What am I going to do? Sit around and play golf or whatever? I was in the hyperactive, all-consuming sport of scaling these companies with venture funding, and it's all-consuming for all these years. It's like playing in the NFL, right? It takes years off your life if you do it right. So I love the game, but I don't need to carry the ball anymore and get beat up and so forth. So these crazy entrepreneurs, from your son who's got a big idea and just starting something to somebody who's been doing it for a while, or a bootstrap software company or whatever, these are my people. They're the crazy entrepreneurs who are solving problems and doing really hard things. And it's a wonderful puzzle, like the puzzle of storytelling. There's some commonalities that are the same in any generation, any time, but it's always a different time, a different personality, a different background, the founder, a different market, a different generation. There's new business models. So the puzzle is always changing. And I spend time with 20 to 30 entrepreneurs and founders, CEOs, investors a week. So I'm extroverted, and I just like to sit around and talk to people all the time and help them out.
So you've moved from the gridiron playing field in the trenches to now coaching and commentating.
That's
I
right.
guess.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Using all of your experience. And again, when we just had this hike, I'm talking about the business of story and what we're up against, and you shared some of the things that some of your customers are up against. You were founder of Scaping Point, so you help those startups go to that next level. And the thing that always shocks me, and it shouldn't shock me, but it also bums me out, it's like the advice you give is like, well, duh. Why, I should have known that. Why didn't I come up with that? Why is it so hard to work on ourselves in our businesses when we think we've got it going right, but we're probably spinning our wheels in a lot of places we shouldn't be, and you need that outside person looking in? Why is it so freaking hard?
Well, I think part of the fun of what I help entrepreneurs with, and it's a universal human trait, so it isn't just some entrepreneurs have it and some don't. They all have it. We're deep in our business, me, myself included. We think deeply about it all day long. We've seen all the history. We have all the ideas in front of us that we are thinking about, and we have tried every variation of everything, but the people we're selling to have zero context. They don't think about it. They got a problem. They want an answer. So we have this big, wide, we could talk about it for days kind of perspective in our head. And if you're on the field, you're in survival mode. So your brain is really working. I got to make payroll. I got to grow or die and all that stuff. Competition. It's, it'll wire your brain a certain way in entrepreneurs. And we're doing that in our businesses to some extent. And then the buyers on the other side, the people we're trying to communicate with, they don't want to hear most of that. They just want to hear the simple thing on the other side. What are you going to do for me? Why is it amazing? Are you really just for me? What's your specialty? Make it simple. I want to hear a simple story.
Come on, you got to do your accent with the, I want that.
Oh, yeah, I want that. There's people, they have a very specific need. Like Park, you serve a lot of different, target users, I guess, or buyers, or people that could use, whether it's students or salespeople or entrepreneurs or brand leaders and marketers or scientists or the rest. They all want a little different thing. That your magic trick, the ABT and the story stuff. I've learned a ton from all the Business of Story podcasts. I use it all the time. I'm a huge fan of the ABT model. So getting to simple is hard. And that's the deception. We see simple from the outside in all the brands and all the communications. We don't see the complexities, how they got there. We don't see how the sausage was made. So it's very confusing. But bridging that gap is the game.
You shared something last night that I did not realize, that Mark Zuckerberg, had 18 failed apps before he went, Facebook.
Yeah, and it's always there. Somebody who says, I just did Facebook and then it went to the moon. You could say, well, was that the first thing you ever tried? And the answer is always no. We wandered around. We tried a bunch of stuff. So Mark Zuckerberg, as a high school student, he was building apps. And he was trying to make something. He made something for his mom's psychiatry office or his dad's psychiatry office, a communication app, an old chat, and this and that, and he was constantly making apps. So when he saw the Facebook and, the servers went down at Harvard, that's a sign. Okay, that's way better. I'm going to do that, he says. I want that, right? So, yeah, there's always an experimentation phase. I call it the ADD phase. That's normal for startup founders. You think you have an idea, but you got to get on the field and you got to experiment around and find something and test it and prove it. And then you have to do the contradictory thing, which is, you're a chef. I know you can make any kind of food, but a restaurant is one kind of food in one place for one audience. What is your chicken sandwich or your whatever? So,
and that was underscored last week. Michelle and I were watching Netflix and a history thing on Heinz and Campbell's Soup. And I thought of you when it came to the conclusion of the show. So Heinz owned the food industry, and they had hundreds of different products. And of course, everyone knows their ketchup and mustards and condiments and whatever. And then Campbell showed up and wanted to go head to head with them. And they brought in an engineer scientist who said, soup. And he went to France and he tried to create this condensed soup. And it took him several years, but they finally nailed it. And then they owned the market. And Heinz then came in, well, we've got to go head to head with soup. And they were so much bigger, they were having an impact on Campbell's. And finally, the scientist, buys Campbell's, and he goes, you know what? We're going to get rid of 199 of our products that are competing with Heinz, and we are only going to do soup.
Right.
And I thought, there's that focus again.
Yeah. And it's always there, that like whether it's early in our careers and we try a bunch of things and then we settle in and all that stuff. So, when something is growing, successful, and everybody knows it's the one, and there's a line at the restaurant or a line forming and all of that kind of thing, there's always a specialist in the end of it. And they could do more things. This is what you don't see. They could make any kind of food, but Chick-fil-A just makes chicken sandwich. Any restaurant could make any kind of food in a couple days, and they don't. They would just break
In-N-Out Burger, another example. And I had mentioned to my brother Tom, who's up in Denver, they just opened up their first In-N-Out near his home, and he said he had a colleague that actually sat in his car for 8 hours in line to get an In-N-Out Burger. I mean, that's madness.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually what everybody wants in growing a tech company, is they want super fans and a line and great business. Like, there's no monopoly on burgers. Right? But not everybody has a line. So there's something in that. So absolutely.
Now, you just launched your podcast.
Yeah, I have a new podcast here. So you've inspired me as well. I moved to Dallas 2 years ago and started connecting with founders and people in the tech ecosystem there. Of course, Dallas-Fort Worth is a big town, bigger than Phoenix. But it wasn't known as a startup and tech center. And there's kind of a story there that says we don't do startups here. We do big things, big companies, big churches, big oil, big money, big football or whatever in Dallas. But you got to go to Austin to do crazy startups. And I thought, well, that's silly. They used to say that in Phoenix. Now they don't. And so I started helping everyone out there. And with Greg's List Dallas, a list of 700 software and SaaS companies in Dallas, real active software companies. People had no idea. They look at the list and say, wow, that's amazing, like happened in Greg's List Phoenix. So I'm starting the Dallas Software Podcast to showcase, interview founders and CEOs of these software companies and expose them to the world and connect them to each other and help solve the problem. So creating a business is nobody else is in your game and owns your problem and on your field and so forth, but it's always a team sport, just like the Olympics or whatever. There's people that can help in the network, and so I'm one of the helpers and the connectors and, therapists. I mean, like the group here in Flagstaff, there's a lot of therapy in hanging out with founders who all went through COVID together in their business, right? Yeah. And they all came out stronger, I would say. So that's actually one of the interesting things is, unless you were in hospitality software, travel software, and maybe a few others, wellness, right? Yoga studio software or something like that, 90% of software companies are way stronger 1 year after COVID. There's more technology moving in the world, but they were forced to line up behind their foods. What's your Campbell's soup? And, they cut off their options and then they went forward. So there's
what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of really strong software companies. And there's an impressive cohort of Phoenix software companies that are growing up. The generation, this is what's going to change the future of Phoenix as far as tech is concerned.
So you had been in Phoenix with your wife and family for a long time. You moved to Dallas, and even though your wife has family there, did you feel a little bit like a stranger in a strange land?
Oh, yeah.
You kind of had to rebuild your brand or build maybe from scratch your brand out there.
Yeah, people knew me in Phoenix. I was an old timer in the software game here, and I was hyperactive and helping and connecting. So I knew almost everybody in tech in Phoenix. And so I go to Dallas, nobody knows me at all, right, kind of thing. And so I had to evaluate, well, okay, what am I going to do here? And can I help? Where do I? So it took me a couple of years to actually see what the situation was. And there actually aren't like former entrepreneurs helping them. There's universities and cities, and they do things, but they don't they're not really helping the entrepreneur get from this messy place to a bigger place,
But they don't know you either, so you've got to build trust within that group.
Right. So the Dallas Software Podcast, I'm interviewing a CEO a week, and we have great conversations, and then I'm there to help them, and they see that there's people to help. This is normal in Silicon Valley. There's all kinds of people that help, and then the founders help each other, and they're, half of their day is connecting like that.
Now, what I like about your show that I think is really fascinating is when people do a podcast, where yours included here, you're thinking global reach, I'm going to cast this big net. And you still have that. It just comes with the territory. But you are so singularly focused on talking to the software founders and groups in Dallas that you are so specific. It goes back to your point and scaling point of what's my one thing.
Right.
Dallas software.
Yeah, I've been in the software industry since 1990, and it's basically in the pro sport. And so I have as much insight and experience, and be talking to hundreds of founders and working with dozens of, a year. I have as much savvy about the SaaS, the software and the growth game as almost anybody. But it's really, the software business is really big, and it's really crowded. There's a lot of people saying, we have the magic trick for software company, right? Including some big names. So it's kind of like you can't make a big name for yourself unless you've done the latest unicorn, billion-dollar software company. So it's kind of crowded up there. And so it's not crowded in the Dallas software tech zone. I asked 50 founders, how do you connect to other founders? Is there somebody in town that's really helped you? Where's the network? How do you guys, which in Phoenix, there's probably 50 people that are full-time active, surrounding and networking, helping, and all that. And there wasn't anybody in Dallas. So it occurred to me, yes, there's there's 700 software companies, and this is the entrepreneurial moment. Everybody you talk to works for big companies in Dallas, and everybody says it's not really a startup town. But I'm going to go in and change that. Once we get this, a collective, right? And, the story together and enough success stories, we can change what people think about Dallas as a tech startup town.
And so you've got a mission, and it's not easy to produce a podcast. You've got to track down your guests. You have to do your research. You are handling the production yourself now, so you have several hours invested in it. And I would imagine where most hosts are looking at, I need to get 100,000 listeners or above, and I want to scale this thing. Your metric, I would imagine, is more like, how many in Dallas can I get listening to this? Because that's really your thing, to help that particular group. So it's taking a mass media like this, but really focusing it on a core community.
Yeah, where it's amazing to them, right? And they have to listen to it. And as opposed to the 450th software growth podcast, right? So if you look at Facebook, it's everything to everybody now. But in the beginning, it was just Harvard, right? Just Ivy League and all that kind of thing. So there's always, when there's an acceleration and a growth, there's always that focusing in to do it. And I help founders with this. They say, I want to create a big company, but you don't start, and this is, I call it the target market trap. How can we be big unless we're selling to everybody right now? There's just no power in that, and it's a very challenging business. But when you zoom in to where you're just amazing and nobody else is doing it, you can accelerate and then spread out later. So In-N-Out, by the way, still hasn't added chicken sandwiches and salads and everything else that McDonald's has, right? It's still just burgers. Chick-fil-A still just chicken sandwiches. And they're the ones with the lines, aren't they?
What's your one thing?
Yeah. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs in Dallas. And, when we moved to Phoenix to start SalesLogix in the 90s, there was no software company. There's 10 software companies. It wasn't a startup town. It was kind of crazy. We did a Silicon Valley venture-backed growth game where, in Phoenix. So it was very strange in Phoenix. But we didn't expect the crowd to be with us and have support from anybody. We just basically went and did it. And so from that kind of frontier era, I don't think you need incubators and local funding and co-working spaces and the mayor patting you on the back or whatever. You got to go build something. So if we build something, if more of these companies grow, then it will be a tech town. That's all there is. So we actually have to grow these companies. So happy to help the Dallas founders. I think you and I probably both benefited from the COVID changes, that we don't have to be we don't have to be right there. We don't have to be in the office.
I'm sitting on a deck up here on Lake Hotel in Munns Park, Arizona.
Right. But I was just as connected in Phoenix as I ever was being remote, because there was no advantage of being at the coffee shop or down the street. And so I spend, I'm working with tons of founders here and helping out, and Greg's List Phoenix and all the partners that are supporting Greg's List in Phoenix. Everybody's still working together.
Yeah. What 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice could you give our listeners? And maybe they're not in the software startup. Maybe they're just trying to start up their consultancy because COVID has thrown them for a loop. Maybe they lost their job, or maybe they said, I don't want this job anymore. I want to go out like you and I guess, and be a coach, be a commentator, and help people. From your experience now, starting in Dallas, and all the work you do with your other startups, what some advice to folks out there? If they're struggling, they're trying to get their consultancy going, they feel like they got something, they've have been validated because they've got some business coming in, but it just isn't growing.
Yeah, it's a common challenge. So a lot of people want to quit their jobs and be a consultant, an independent practitioner. And the same thing, a lot of people want to do a startup now. And from both sides of them, for the people who've been doing it a long time, we all know it's way harder than it looks. And most people who say they're going to do it don't survive for 10 years and create something bigger. So there's something you could say that's similar to both of them, in that the challenge isn't, can you make software that works, or do you have knowledge that's useful? That's not, let's say you have that, right? That's not the challenge to make a successful business, a sustainable business. Quit my job and be able to pay the bills, or something. The challenge is to give enough customers revenue and growth that's continuous to keep it going. That's the challenge, the sales and marketing and storytelling side of things, right? So it's not, can I make a hamburger? It's, can I get people to wait 8 hours for my hamburger?
It's not what you make, it's what you make happen.
The challenge there is you got to be amazing at something, but how can I find what the specialty is that I can get traction with, right? People jump out and say, I can do many things. Well, nobody's going to line up for many things to many people. Food, any kind of food. I can solve anything. Right? I'm a handyman and I can work with anything. Well, I guess these days any handyman would be employed, but in consulting and marketing and agencies and software startups, you have to find something that, take the time to find something that you can specialize in, right? What's your specialty? And that takes time. For most people, I say, don't quit your day job. At night, start testing and see if you can get something going. And almost everybody, it's just a human brain problem, starts out wider than they should, right? They think they have the answer, they jump in and they realize, oh, it's not moving as fast. And the answer is always specialize, narrow in on somebody to serve, your target market, or narrow in on the thing that you deliver, your category or your hamburger or your software or whatever it is. So generally, startups, it's experimenting, running around and testing stuff. And before they find something that can focus to scale. That's a thing. So don't quit your day job until you're pretty confident where you can double down and focus.
And you got to ask that question, and it seems so obvious, but it's hard when you are right in the fog of war of, what am I actually delivering for my customer? What do they want? Going back to you, I want that.
Yeah.
And then how can your product, service, widget get them there?
Yeah, and that's, we in our own businesses, every business is challenged to continually work on this, but that's why you can't do it at the whiteboard. I have an idea, I think it's the right idea, I'm going to quit my job, and then it's going to work. You actually have to get out with people, and then you realize they don't understand what you're talking about. They don't have that problem. Even if they have the problem and they buy it, maybe they don't have the wherewithal to get to the result. Oh, there's 12 different kinds of people that need story counseling and all of that. So the learning for what works to actually create a valuable result for somebody happens when you're out there doing it live.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. So you got to survive long enough with all those experiments. Startups are experiments. You got to survive long enough to find the thing that really works that you can double down on. So every restaurant that scales, the biggest ones, McDonald's was just burgers, and Starbucks, number 2, is the second largest, was just coffee with your name on it. Started for, you know, from your hometown Seattle, where coffee with your name on it was already a thing, and the third one is Chick-fil-A, just chicken sandwiches. Well, they all started with many things to many people, and then set like a restaurant, and Chick-fil-A and McDonald's were restaurants serving every kind of food, and they say we're just going to do burgers, but they couldn't realize that until they have to go through that. So it's going to take longer than you think to find what your chicken sandwich is or who your tribe is and all of that. So it took me 2 years to realize that there's an opportunity in Dallas and get started. It'll take me another 2 years to feel like I'm making a dent in it and help a lot of people and create a different perception in Dallas.
You know, I started studying story really diligently back in 2004 and came up with the complex. It was complex to me, and that was the hero's journey, the 17 steps mapped down to then the 10-step story cycle system, which I was able to use to great effect. I mean, grew one company by 600%, and she would say because of that. But it was complex. It was hard for people to do on their own. I needed to be there and still need to be there to coach them through it. And I've learned then it's not as much of a storytelling tool as it is a story strategy tool. Just fill in the blanks here. It's going to help you get your head around your story. And then as the more I studied, it got into the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact that you can tell an anecdote to make your business point. And of course, landed on the ABT, the and, but, therefore, introduced to me by Randy Olson in 2013. And I go, this is where it all starts. And so now my focus is getting people to do the ABT, learning the ABT for email writing, presentation. I mean, you've been through it a million times now. You use it to great effect. But it's so simple. I mean, I was in the trap of, but it's hard to do. It's a simple concept, and my thinking was, well, if people are paying me, shouldn't I bring in more complexity because they're paying for that? Right. And in the exact opposite is true. You just simplify their life as much as you possibly can to help them get what they want. And my work is around the ABT pretty much solely at this point. Right.
Well, and the story model is true and universal and historical, and it's how our brains work and all that stuff. But how many iterations did you run since in the last 5 or 6 years to do this? How many times were you telling the story on stage and consulting and doing workshops and the rest? So that's like, from the wide to the narrow to find this thing that is really works. So I couldn't implement the 10-step story model myself. I was taking notes and everything. I went back and I'm like, I don't know. But the ABT, I saw it and I could see it everywhere. Yeah. Right. And I could smell there was something there, and then I could kind of use it, and a little coaching from you guys, and because it's not just a bit of knowledge and then you're there. It's like a skill, like playing guitar. There's the 3 chords of rock and roll, the 1, 4, 5. That's in 90% of rock and roll. It's all different, but like you could spend your whole life exploring 3 chords, and every song is a little different, and all of that, and different keys and different variations and different, all that stuff. So it's kind of stunning when you realize, I play a little guitar, a tune on the radio, and I could pick it up really fast, and they say, man, that's magical, you're a musician. I'm like, no, there's a simple system to it. Like all of the blues is 1, 4, 5, right? Yeah. And there's the 10-bar blues. It's all the same thing, and you get the right key and you're there, kind of thing. And then the game starts, right? So it's a lifetime of learning around that. So I love what you're doing with the ABT. I think it's very universal. I think what entrepreneurs do at scale is they just don't create a product in a business. They change how the world thinks about hamburgers and coffee with your name on it and the rest, right? They literally install a new, to me, that's creation. They're installing a new thing in the world that we didn't do before. Podcasts, Zooming, all the stuff that we do didn't exist before, and some crazy person had to get it going and get a little tribe that started to move it and install that in our brains. That's what we do. We drive through now, and we get burgers and all that stuff. So to me, the ABT is the installation tool of that. If you just do the PowerPoints and the facts and all that, that doesn't move anything in the world. narrative moves people in the world. And that's how we take something and we make it true to ourselves, right? Story. Whether it's in politics or, selling, marketing, creating, the narrative model is always there.
Setup,
the
problem
best
resolution.
storytellers install the most, Steve Jobs and the rest. By the way, one of my favorite storytellers, Ron Popeil, just died. The famous...
The pocket fisherman.
He did the commercials when we were young with these gadgets, and these were, for those of us that care about the craft of selling and marketing, he was the master of pitch, demos, and all that, and the 30-second thing, and Ginsu knives, and all that stuff like that, But he did, he also killed it with his infomercials for the rotisserie chicken. And you could laugh at this and you say it's hokey and everything, but he was super structured about it. And he was like a super artist, as is Steve Jobs, the ABT. They used that. I mean, you could just see them, symphonies of ABTs in there. He sold $1 billion worth of that rotisserie chicken thing and broke all the sales records and everything. So I love this game, and I'm a student of it, and you've taught me a lot about the storytelling narrative. That's helped me a lot.
You use the ABT to great effect in your LinkedIn posts.
Yeah.
And you use them in a lot of different ways. You've kind of mastered it, and it's taken a while to get there. Most people, you got to practice, but you use them in long-form posts and short-form posts, and you're getting a lot.
So I have a lot of knowledge. I'm talking to founders. I kind of know what's happening this month in software, and I know most of the mechanics of the software business and pretty knowledgeable, and I have some wisdom about things and plenty of good stories. Yeah. But that's not enough, Park. So, right?
Nice work.
There we go. So, no, it wasn't enough. And so people want a shorter story. They don't want to hear the long form. They want you to do the work, to say, you're here, you have this problem. Yeah, okay, I got that. But here's the problem. They want you to put a point on it. Like, tell me why I should care, right? And create the answer for me. Set it up. And if you don't do it, it's just boring commentation or whatever, but like people want it. So I've gotten shorter LinkedIn posts, and within the first 2 paragraphs I do the situation, the and then the but, right? And if you don't get that in a LinkedIn post, they're not going to open it and not read the rest, So I have things to say. So that's my way of, I'm saying, I've talked to 10 founders in the last week about this, and there's a general confusion, and there's an answer that everybody knows on the other side. How come people aren't seeing this? I can install that. My posts get 10,000 views. And so, and there's a lot of chatter on LinkedIn, but there's not a lot of wisdom, useful stuff. So it's my way of kind of installing some useful stuff out there, because it's a little deeper than the fluffy stuff on top and the rest. So I use ABT, the setup, the contradiction, and then here's the kind of thing. Just create a little drama, and people love that.
Christopher Lockhead, the legendary Silicon Valley marketer, had me on his show, Christopher Lockhead on Marketing, about 2 months ago, and I introduced to him the ABT on the show, and he hadn't heard about it, but it made immediate sense to him. The next day, he uses it in a tweet, and then he sends me a screenshot of the tweet and says, I have never had this much interaction on a tweet ever. And he had over 60,000 engagements on that one tweet, and it was written as an ABT.
And he's a structured guy, talking about category and everything else.
Category design.
And an old-time marketer. And he's got energy and talent, right? Yeah. And here's, I think, the power in this, which is why I'm so excited for you and ABT and all the possibilities, is you would not have been able to explain to Christopher Lockhead the 10-step model in a few minutes in the podcast. But you can explain to that. He can hear it and take it, right? You install it, right? And there's something useful, and then he can play with it. It's like learning, GCD on the guitar for the first time, and you can play a version of almost any rock and roll tune with those 3 chords, and then you're off and running, right? Yeah. So that's what you did. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see how it's growing. And, I've got the online course. You went through that. And we've got the new book out, The Narrative Gym for Business, that I co-wrote with Randy. He came out with a general version of it last year called The Narrative Gym, because we'd been teaching scientists and academics and during COVID about it. And I said, hey, I got this new course. What if we rewrite this specifically to business? And he was, he was all on board. So we jumped back in and rewrote it specifically for the business world. And I'm just tickled with it because I have seen the power of it and how many people have said, God, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's everywhere these days. So that's kind of the fun stuff. It's like hidden in plain sight. These are universal truths, but they're not obvious.
Yeah.
And nobody's teaching it,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're kind of stunned when you realize most rock and roll is 3 chords. Mm-hmm. And, that shifts up and down the neck and the scales. You play piano and everything, but that gives you access to a whole new world. But you wouldn't see it from the outside. You just think it's magic.
Yeah.
Right? It all looks magic to the outside.
It's when the talent takes over. It's the practice. It's the 10,000 hours of practice, and they make it their own, and they have their own style. You're talking about, want to play like Clapton. Well, you can go on YouTube and download a video and teach you how to play like Clapton. Well, you're not going to play like Clapton. You probably don't have the talent, but do you have the perseverance to work as hard to get that nuance down? And in our communication, the ABT and everything else you do is kind of the same thing. You bring in great structures for your founders to build on, but they got to do it. They got to practice it, and they got to bring themselves to it every single day and do it in their own way, but to follow that path, right?
Yeah, and I mentor, and I spend half my time just helping people at the startup, people who can't pay anything, and I connect them and help them go, right? Somebody's got to help these people, and there's a lot of people to do. I'm not the only guy that does that. But the companies that I work with that pay me, they know they have a deep problem. I help the deep work and so forth. And we work on it together. It's intensive. It's not scalable or whatever. And we get to the answer, and then it's true and everything. And then I add the ABT in there, right? That's what you are. That's your chicken sandwich for these people. And I get it, right? In tech, you could make any kind of food. You can make any kind of software. Mm-hmm. And so tech founders are saying, I can make any kind of software for anybody. And then they realize that the game is being known as the best at something important for someone specific. But once we kind of get to, like Christopher Lochhead talks about the category, what are we going to be, for whom, product and market, that all the laws of nature that are there, the ABT is now let's do the installation narrative. Mm-hmm. What's the situation? What's the problem in the world? Why is this the answer? Mm-hmm. Why do we need drive-through hamburgers? Why do we need podcast recording devices and everything? So the ABT is always there as well.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about it with the ABT too, it makes you really focus on your audience. And what I say, here's the steps you go through. Write down your audience. What do they want? And why is it important to them?
Yeah.
But why don't they have it?
Yeah.
Therefore, how are you going to help them get it?
Right. And if you miss the but, the most important word there's they're not going to hear you about anything. They're not going to do anything as a result. It's the setup for the doing something. There's a lot of great knowledge in the world and all that, but action that creates results that's the game, mm-hmm. right? Action that creates results, whether building a company and so forth, or getting people to buy your book or whatever. So, the B and the T, right? Is where
you got to have all of it. A, B, and T. And the A opens up the story loop. Yeah. The B creates the tension. And okay, what are we going to do about this? And it begs the question in our subconscious, how do I solve this? And then the therefore closes that story loop. And what we've learned, when you are not closing that story loop, your audience is going to close it for you, and they will tend to close it with a worst case scenario story, mm-hmm. because it's so finite. Their brain doesn't want ambiguity. So you don't want your customers closing your story loop for you. You want to do it. And that's the other thing that the ABT does. It makes you set up, problem, resolution, close that story loop.
Well, I talk to 500 founders a year. So that's in the last 5 years, thousands of founders. And there's conversation is always tell me about yourself, what's your business and what's going on. But I think what I'm helping them with is what's the problem, right? Yeah, because startup is like I'm going here. I don't know all the stuff, right? I'm just going, that's the nature of it. So I can do enough diagnostics to say, for that, I think the challenge is this. And then they can see that, and then there's a therefore. Therefore, I had to connect you to somebody else, or you ought to think about this, or do this, or read that, or try this, or something like that. But I would say in my world, we're kind of getting quickly through the situation, and the what do you want, and all that, and figuring out what the problem is, right? So I'm kind of I like to play doctor with that kind of stuff, and that's the puzzle that's fun. And it isn't the same for everybody. So, yeah.
Well, Greg, thanks for coming by. And are you going to be presenting the ABT and Flagstaff to these folks, or do they already know about it?
I don't know if they know about it, but they definitely will, Park. How about that? So I'll let you know.
And here's Hazel coming over to say, hey, thanks
doggy.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, such a beautiful house and a beautiful lake, and thanks for your hospitality this week, and to hike and hang out and talk shop and be on your podcast, Park.
Awesome having you here. I appreciate you swinging by.
Thanks.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If you liked what you heard, if you've got a founder out there, if you are a founder out there, share this with your friends, your families, your colleagues, your investors. Greg had Scaping Point. He has been doing this a long time, is an absolute gem in the marketing world around software and technology. Check him out I need to ask you that. Where do we send people? Do you want them to go right to your podcast?
They can start on LinkedIn. So if they look for Greg Head on LinkedIn, I'll probably show up on the top, and we can chat from there. And then we'll have a quick call, and happy to help. So no obligation.
Yeah. And check out his new podcast. I was listening to it the other day driving up from Phoenix, and I found it fascinating, the Dallas Software Podcast, because the founders have ubiquitous stories. I mean, we can all relate to what they're going through. You don't have to live in Dallas, and you don't have to be a software founder to get a lot out of this particular show. This new show, he's about 12 episodes in, so jump on, check it out. And of course, if I can be of service to you, come on over to thebusinessofstory.com. You can find me on LinkedIn too. I don't think there's another Park Howell on there, so just search Park Howell, I'll pop up. Be happy to chat with you there. And please join me next week when we will have another amazing story artist here for you like Greg. And until then, remember that the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.